Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to welcome you to this Bluetongue Virus Update webinar with a question and answer session. I'm Lynn Briggs, and I'm in the Beef and Lamb Engagement team at AHDB, and I'll be chairing the session today. We've got three very valuable speakers for you today. So we have Natalie Sampson, who's Deputy Chief Vet Officer for Wales, and Natalie will be giving us the Welsh policy update following the introduction of the All Wales Restricted Zone on Monday. And we have Christopher Sanders, who's Group Leader in Entomology at the Pirbright Institute. And Chris will be giving us an overview of the role of the midge in the spread of Bluetongue. And we also have Jim Hopkins, who's a Director of Yakidar Vet Practice. And Jim is giving us his experience in Bluetongue from a vet's perspective. So each of our speakers will have around, well, up to 15 minutes to do their presentations, to give us their updates. And that should leave us plenty of time to go through your questions at the second half of this webinar. At that point, we'll welcome in Gordon Hickman as well, who's Head of Exotic Disease at Policy for DEFRA. And Jim will be joining us for the Q&A session. So all the speakers will be on hand at the end of the webinar to answer any concerns and questions that you will have. Just some housekeeping points. So this webinar is being recorded, and it will be circulated within 24 hours of the end of the webinar. So if you're having any technical difficulties or you drop out for any reason, then the webinar will be shared and you can watch it again at a later date. It will be available on YouTube and on the AHDB websites, as well as the Ruminant Health and Welfare websites as well. Please put your questions in the questions box. So one of the key areas for this webinar this evening is for us to answer your questions. So there's a little question box in the top right-hand corner of your screen. Please put your questions in there, and as I said, we'll get to your questions after the speakers have had their sessions. Yeah, do post your questions. They are anonymous, and we obviously will try and keep it anonymous, or we will keep it anonymous, but it's just important for us to get your questions and to answer them as best that we can. If you could also complete, there's a feedback form for us as well. For AHDB, so we'd really appreciate your feedback on these webinars. It just helps us gauge how useful they are, if we need to tweak them a little bit, and it also to give us any feedback on any other topic areas that you would like additional information on from AHDB. And please do, you see in the top right of that slide, there's a QR code to scan to get your CPD points as well. So we do have additional, lots of tools and resources available to you on the AHDB and Ruminant Health and Welfare websites. I just want to signpost you to before we get into our speakers. There's things like the Bluetongue movement checker, which has been constantly updated and does reflect the changes that came into effect in Wales on Monday, on the 10th of November. So please do check the movement checkers. We have a vaccine finance calculator as well, which is a really good tool to have a look at the cost and implications of vaccinating, and the decision maker tool, so whether you need to, which animals you would need to vaccinate, etc. And comparison tables on the vaccines, and is it too late to vaccinate tool as well. So they're all really useful tools. And as I said, they're available on the AHDB website and the Ruminant Health and Welfare websites as well. And these are updated to reflect the current changes in the disease progression. There's, as I mentioned, there are other websites coming up, and we have another one on the 10th of December. So to keep you up to date as well with the progression of the disease. And we also have an impact survey, which I'd really appreciate if you were able to complete that as well. The impact survey is a series of questions. It's very easy to follow. It's anonymous, but we do ask just for the first part of your postcode so that we can have an idea of where you're based. But that's the only bit of information that we ask from a farm perspective. And then the rest of the questions are very much based around your findings from what's happened on farm with Bluetongue so far for you. So it's important for us to get this survey back, and if you were able to complete it before the 31st of December, that would be appreciated. And we, for example, used the results of this survey in 2024, at the end of 2024, and that sort of helped to shape how we dealt with Bluetongue in 2025. So it is important to get your feedback, and it's a series of fairly straightforward questions, just asking about your herd and your flocks, and the impact that you've seen or not on your herd or flock from Bluetongue this year. So that would be really helpful if you could fill that in as well, please. And next slide. So yeah, so we'll come on to the Q&A session at the end of the speakers, but I just want to introduce our first speaker, who is Dr. Natalie Sampson, and her said is Deputy Chief Vet Officer for Wales. And Natalie will give us an update on the Welsh policy with some technical updates following the introduction of the All Wales Restriction Zone on Monday. That was Monday the 10th of November, and current case numbers. Thank you, Natalie.
Thanks, Lynn, and thank you all for having me on this evening. I'm just going to practice a little bit, but apologies if my slide control goes a bit wrong. So as Lynn said, I am Natalie Sampson. I'm the Deputy Chief Vet for Wales, and I'm going to just talk to you for a couple of minutes about the latest changes in Bluetongue policy in Wales. Hopefully this will work. It doesn't say maybe it takes its time. So I'll just skip over this. This is just what I'm going to talk about, and it's just a basic slide at the start. Okay. So most of you will be interested in numbers, and I know that's always one of the first things that you want to hear. So in terms of the situational update, I'm talking about England as well. Gordon is here for questions afterwards, but he's not presenting, and normally we would do this between us. And in fact, I think I've got slightly updated figures since I submitted this slide deck earlier this morning. So in total, we've had actually 178, not 174, but 178 Bluetongue 3 cases in GB, so in England and Wales. Of those, 165 have been within England and 13 have been in Wales. We've also had some BTB8, and they've all been in England, and there have been 6 in England for this season. We've popped a map on, that's the most up-to-date map I've got, but there is on the slide deck a little link, and you can check the maps at any one point. DEFRA generally keep them very updated, so they tell us all the information that we need. So the other stats that everyone's always really interested in are vaccination numbers. Now, these are the vaccination numbers in Wales only, and the latest I have are that we are nearly or just shy of 250,000 vaccinations of animals as reported by vets, the majority in cattle. Animal keepers have reported about 175,000. Interestingly, they're the majority in sheep, as you can see. And as a reminder, there's usually a discrepancy between the vets and animal keepers' records, because the vets report when they prescribe them, and the keepers report when they give them, and there's usually a lag phase between them. But that just gives you an idea of how many we've had in Wales. So in terms of our current policy and where we've been, the little journey that we've been on through the summer and autumn, our aim was to keep the Bluetongue out of Wales for as long as possible. We had 2 risk pathways that we looked at. One was through midges and one was through movement. And we put in mitigations to try and manage those and delay the incursion of Bluetongue into Wales. And vitally, it was to provide time for farmers to prepare and to vaccinate if that was the right thing for them to do. We also kept a very close eye on temperatures. Now, this is the latest in temperatures that we've got as well. For the eagle-eyed among you, you will see that the map is now all white. And I think that's the first time I've showed you an all-white map. And that tells us that the temperatures have decreased. So in terms of our policy development, we look backwards for 18 years, and some of that data enabled us to make some changes a few weeks ago. But the data that we had come through determined that the last data when a midge would be able to complete its extrinsic incubation period, EIPs as we actually term them, so it's too much of a mouthful, was typically the 10th of November. And you'll all recognise that was the date of Monday when we introduced our policy changes. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand, therefore, why we picked that date. The recent temperature monitoring, as per the map, you can see, means that has supported that date as well. Just as a reminder, and there'll be a few reminders in this, this dictates newly infected midges can't complete their EIPs, but any midges that were infected before and are still alive are capable of biting and transmitting infection. There is some good news though. With the cooler temperatures, midges also become less active, so are less likely to bite. So all in all, we're moving towards a much better place. So that's enabled us to bring in an all Wales restricted zone, and that was declared on Monday. But what does that mean in tangible terms? Well, essentially it means free movement of livestock. Livestock can move between England and Wales, and they don't require vaccination or other mitigation measures. We do still recommend vaccination, and that'll be an ongoing message that you'll hear through this, including for livestock moving to TAC. And along with the restricted zone being declared, the TCZ was revoked as well, on Monday, and all movement and premises restrictions that were in place through the TCZ or the temporary control zone were lifted. So just going into a little bit more depth on what free movement actually means. It means you don't need a specific license, so you don't need to apply for APHA for a specific license to move animals, and you don't need any pre-movement tests. You do, however, need to meet the conditions of a general license. I've popped the license number on here to move animals between England and Wales restricted zones. They are technically different restricted zones, although they abut each other. Now, what's a general license? Well, essentially it means you have to follow certain conditions as dictated in the license to move animals. And again, they're not detailed conditions. They dictate that the source of the destination premises must not be under any restrictions, must not be any Bluetongue restrictions specifically, and that the animals have to be healthy. They can't be demonstrating any clinical signs of Bluetongue infection. And I'm sure nobody wants to be moving clinically unwell animals, not just for welfare reasons, but in terms of animal disease control on their own premises and for their own businesses. Alongside the free movement, from the 10th of November, if we do have any BTV3 confirmed animals, we're not going to be culling them. We might be doing some further testing, but that would be based on epidemiological recommendations. Animals moving to Scotland do still need to follow Scottish rules, so you just need to be aware of that. You can't just take animals to Scotland, and do need to look at what requirements you have for that. And germinal product restrictions do remain in place. That's quite a key thing for everyone to be aware of. The final thing that we're going to be doing is ongoing winter surveillance, and I'll talk to you in a little bit more detail about a couple of slides on and the reasons. The big awareness piece is you might receive or have received already a letter about that. So going into another little bit more detail, what's going to happen for any new report cases? So if you suspect BTV infection, whether in your clients, if you're a vet, or on your farm, if you're a keeper, you do still need to report suspicion of to APHA of Bluetongue. That's not changed. So the process of reporting hasn't changed. And an APHA vet will still visit, and if Bluetongue can't be ruled out, samples will be taken. Now, we will put brief restrictions on, but that's not because of Bluetongue 3. That's because there are other types of Bluetongue, and we are, with these policy changes, just talking about Bluetongue 3. So if the samples are negative for Bluetongue full stop, or they confirm Bluetongue 3, restrictions will be lifted, and you're all good to go. So what are we thinking is going to happen with Bluetongue 3 in Wales? Well, we do think it's going to spread. We're thinking overwintering is likely, and we are worried about fertility issues and production losses come the spring. I'm sure many of you are as well. Once it's in, getting it out is incredibly difficult, but we're hoping that vaccine development will continue, and we will see some changes in the data sheets and the claims on the vaccines. And of course, as you'll all be aware, there may be long-term impacts on trade. We do continue surveillance, and I've just said that briefly. And this is a very short reminder. I'm sure all of you are well aware already, but breeding transmission is possible. It is a worry, and that's where the fertility and production losses also link in. The chaps can get infertile from the disease, and of course the pregnant females can transmit it vertically, which might mean dummy calves or early pregnancy abortions. I'm sure you're all more than aware of the clinical impact, the potential clinical impacts of disease. So finally, we're nearly there. The next steps, so that's all about our winter surveillance. So what we're doing when we're doing winter surveillance, going out and sampling and looking for bluetongue, is we're trying to assess the true extent of BTB3. We're testing the assumption that some parts of Wales remain free. So that's the same thing, really. We're looking how far bluetongue is, where it is and where it isn't. And we're also probably vitally looking for entry of other BTB strains. I said at the start that England have got BTB8. That's mainly in Cornwall. Of course, that is only a little bit further south than the south coast of Wales. We do expect more positive cases to be detected as surveillance expands, and we'll tell you about them when we do. And as I said before, we might do some follow-ups to look at disease transmission pathways. We're trying to learn from the England's restricted zone model. In terms of where we're doing our winter surveillance, we are looking at the England-Wales border and on the southern coast. The explanation for those areas are really self-explanatory when we look at mid-incursion. And it involves testing 47 holdings with 14 cattle tested on each farm or each holding that we're going to. So if you do get a letter, I would urge you please to cooperate. Or I say cooperate is perhaps the wrong word, perhaps urge you to take part, maybe that's the better word, to try and help increase our understanding of bluetongue. Okay, and I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. That was a really useful insight. Thank you. We've got some questions coming in, but I'll hand over. We'll answer all the questions after the speakers have done their sessions, as I said. So now I'd like to hand over to Christopher Sanders. Chris is the group leader in entomology at the Purbright Institute, and Chris is going to give us an overview of the role of the midge in the spread of bluetongue virus, its life cycle, incubation periods, etc., and what that means in relation to the spread of the disease. Thank you, Chris.
Right, hopefully everyone can see my slides. Good evening, everyone, and yeah, thank you. As I said, I'm just going to be hopefully reintroducing you to Culicoides biting midges and their role in transmission of bluetongue virus and how that underpins some of what we've just heard of the transmission season and also vector low periods as well. Just a quick kind of corporate slide, if you like. So the Purbright Institute, where I'm based, is a centre of research for viral diseases, particularly of farm animals and those that spread from farm animals to humans. We conduct fundamental and applied research in a lot of different viruses that are exotic to the UK, and we maintain the reference laboratories for these, including for foot and mouth virus, African swine fever virus, lumpy skin disease, PPRV, and bluetongue. So that's where we're based, and that's why we have this research base on bluetongue virus. So bluetongue virus is a non-contagious vector-borne virus, so it's not spread by direct contact, it's spread through vectors. Bluetongue virus causes bluetongue disease, BTD or BT, in ruminants. It affects sheep, cattle, deer, goats, and camelids. It's exotic to the UK, although we have had the recent introduction of 3 different serotypes in the last 2 years. When we talk about serotypes of virus, there are over 30 serotypes of virus, so you can go from BTB1 all the way up to BTB30. There are effectively 30 different diseases, each with different strains within each serotype and therefore different characteristics. So bluetongue is not one virus, it's many viruses, and that's where we see the complications of having multiple viruses currently in England. We've seen dramatic changes in where and when bluetongue virus occurs since about 1998, particularly movement into Southern Europe, and then the emergence of exotic viruses such as BTV8 and BTV3 into northern temperate regions, particularly seen in Europe. We've also seen an increase in global disease incidence, and we've seen increased virus diversity within endemic regions as well. So there's been a lot happening in the in BTV epidemiology, and we've definitely seen a step change, particularly since 2006, when we had the first BTV8 outbreak in Northern Europe, and then in 2023, when we saw BTV3 emerge in the Netherlands as well. So Bluetongue virus can affect all ruminants, but clinical severity of disease can be really variable, and it's dependent on the virus strain, the virus serotype, but also the virus strain within that serotype, the animal species and the animal breed, and even individual variation within the flock or herd. We normally observe severe clinical disease mainly in sheep, particularly fine wool breeds. And cattle can be clinically affected. Indeed, they have been in the Netherlands in particular, but typically they are subclinically affected. They don't show signs of disease, but act as reservoir hosts. They still get the same amount of virus being produced by their bodies, and they're still able to transmit the virus to the vectors. So BTV is transmitted by these little tiny insects called Chilocoides biting midges. They are really tiny. They're the smallest blood-feeding insects, so much smaller than mosquitoes. They have a near worldwide distribution of maybe 1,500 species worldwide, with about 50 species in the UK. They can be hugely abundant. If you've ever been to the west coast of Scotland in the summer on a calm day, you'll know what I'm talking about. Those are Chilocoides biting midges. And we can collect tens of thousands in a single trap per night and not dent the population. A few species of Chilocoides midges are vectors of Bluetongue, and this includes some UK species. We can tell them apart because of their wing patterning, and down below the main picture of the midge you can see two wings. One on the left is Chilocoides obsoletus, which is a potential vector of Bluetongue, and the one on the right is Chilocoides circumscriptus, which just feeds on birds and probably isn't a very good vector of Bluetongue virus. In contrast to mosquitoes, which we might be more familiar with, we see on holidays certainly and entering our houses at this time of year, Chilocoides don't breed in free water or containers. They breed in damp organic matter. So that's things like soil, leaf litter, and animal dung. And only the females bite, and they require blood meal to produce their eggs. And this biting role leads to their biting action or activity, sorry, leads to their role as vectors. So this is the life cycle of Chilocoides midges. They start off as eggs in their larval habitat, so maybe in animal dung or in leaf mold. They develop into these tiny little vermiform worms, into pupae, and then develop into adults. And it's the females, once they've mated, that go on to blood feed. They blood feed once and produce a batch of eggs, and then they blood feed a second time. This is second blood meal that's important for virus transmission if they've acquired it on their first blood meal. So this is the transmission cycle of Bluetongue. We start off on the left. We have an infected host, and that is infective to midges. And an uninfected adult vector, adult midge, bites this viremic ruminant host. As I said, only some species of Chilocoides can actually act as vectors, and even within a vector population, few individuals are actually capable of acquiring and developing Bluetongue virus infection. That virus, once it's in the blood meal, has to pass through the midge, and this takes time, and this is called the extrinsic incubation period that Natalie introduced earlier. This is happening inside the vector, and because the midge is in the environment and it doesn't have its own, doesn't generate its own body heat, this is dependent on external temperature. And this can last from 4 days when it's really warm to over 20 days when it's cool, and it can still complete. So, as I said, most midges won't be able to complete this extrinsic incubation period, and that sounds strange to say. But those that do get full infection can then bite a susceptible animal, which can then go on to develop viremia develop clinical signs of disease and become infective to vectors after 2 to 4 days, and continue to be highly infectious to vectors for probably at least 14 days after infection. Although I said kind of very few of these insects are actually capable of passing on the virus, those that have completed their EIP are really good at transmitting on to the susceptible host. And because there's so many midges, even though a small proportion can actually transmit Bluetongue virus, because those that can, because there's so many of them, the proportion that can is sufficient to drive transmission. So delving into what we call the extrinsic incubation period, or EIP. So to transmit Bluetongue virus, the virus has to replicate inside the midge and disseminate from the gut. So this is a cut through on the right of a midge in diagram. It's got to get through the gut into the hemocoel, and it's got to travel to the salivary glands. It's only possible in a small proportion of individuals, even for vector species. And we term this vector competence, this proportion that can actually transmit the virus. And typically we see 1 to 15%. Some viruses, this proportion of infected midges can be less than 0.1%, but there's so many midges that you still get transmission. So the EIP is the time it takes to get from that blood meal through the gut to the salivary glands in a susceptible midge. And this is dependent on the virus strain, the vector species, and particularly ambient temperature. So this is a function of the virus replication, and BTB replication can only occur when the temperature is over 12 degrees. And so you can see on the right are fitted models of EIP, and you can see that at less than 12 degrees, we don't get any replication of the virus. So this means that we can, as Natalie was saying earlier, we can say that because the environmental temperatures are lower now, it's very unlikely that a midge feeding on a host now will be able to complete its EIP. It just takes too long, or it wouldn't replicate at all. So now we're in this low transmission period, but it's worth stating that midges are still active at this time. Culicoides are quite cold tolerant and will be active down to about 4 degrees centigrade. Hard frost kills off most adults, so after that kind of second hard frost, we wouldn't expect to see many insects active and many Culicoides active, although when that hard frost occurs, it's occurring later and later in the year. So Culicoides are infected for life, so once they've completed that EIP, they can go on to infect any animal that they then subsequently bite. We don't have any evidence for the virus, Bluetongue virus, passing from one generation of midges to the next. We don't think that occurs. So the question we have is, how do we get persistence of Bluetongue virus in somewhere like the UK, where the adults midges disappear for 3, maybe 4 months of the year, and then we restart circulation of Bluetongue again in the spring. There are several potential mechanisms we don't know outright. Natalie again mentioned earlier the vertical transmission to mammalian hosts, so from a mother cow to a calf. It's a possible mechanism that allows this virus to persist. Or Culicoides, in some cases, may be hiding out in places where they're not experiencing really cold conditions and are then able to bite animals in the spring. So Culicoides are active between April and November, typically peaking in activity in May and September. And you can see on the right this kind of bimodal peak of activity around May and September. They're active at dusk and dawn, and we use the light traps you can see on the right there, just like a moth drawn to a light or a flame. Culicoides are attracted to UV light, and the trap there just sucks them down and puts them in a pot so we can collect them. Because they're so small, they're very strongly influenced by the weather, both in terms of temperature, but also drying. These insects can desiccate quite quickly. So therefore, Bluetongue virus transmission is seasonal, because we got the dependence of the midges on the weather, but also the dependence of the virus replication on the weather as well. So now we're entering the low transmission period, and we will soon, hopefully, be entering the vector-free or vector-low period. We used to say vector-free when we didn't get any activity during the winter. Unfortunately, now we do see Chilocoides being active all the way through to January, especially the last couple of years, we've seen activity in January. So this vector-free period is another step of assurance that we're unlikely to see new cases of Bluetongue virus because the midges aren't active. So now we're in the transmission low period. It's possible that we will see new cases from midges that were infected a while ago, back in September, October, long-lived midges biting animals and infecting new hosts, but we shouldn't see transmission onto the next generation, if you like, the next transmission cycle. When we consistently even see our traps, which are dotted around the UK, when we consistently see that we get less than 5 female midges, we can declare the vector-free season. And this is an even lower risk of transmission of this virus. And this typically happens somewhere between now, late December, that we get this start of the seasonal vector-free period, or as I said, more into January, but that should see us through until March. One thing that's of relevance at the moment is the kind of dispersal activity of Chilocoides because they're so small. Although most things they need are directly on farm, and they're moving between animals, between animal dung, and that's kind of the majority of Bluetongue spread is associated with this short movements of insects between and between farms, but mainly within farms. But occasionally we see long distance dispersal on the prevailing winds, and that's how come we see this introduction of Bluetongue virus from the continent to the UK in the absence of animal movements. So this is likely to have resulted in the incursion of BTV3 from the continent to the UK, and also more recently the incursion of BTV8 into the UK. So even if we do not have overwintering of BTV3 or BTV8 in the UK this year and into next, it's probable that we will get reintroductions of these viruses from the continent. I should say this is kind of a Met Office and per-byte name model determines the risk of incursion and likelihood and location of outbreaks. So what can we do? Hopefully you're all very aware of the Battle Bluetongue campaign because you're here tonight. So vaccines are available for BTV3, but vaccines are serotype specific. Remember, I said there are lots of different BTVs. The BTV3 vaccine will not protect against BTV8, and that's worth considering. In terms of what we can do, often asked about what we can do about the insects themselves. And part of the issue is the biology of these insects because they're so abundant and they're so ubiquitous on farms. We find them everywhere, but they're also really quite diffuse in the habitat as well. So we don't find lots of larvae in one particular spot like you might find for mosquitoes. So there's been suggestions that we could remove animal dung. This has not been shown to affect Chilocoides populations. And insecticide spraying of vector habitats like animal dung is not recommended because of the risk of environmental damage and the lack of impact. Repellents like DEET and other products you might be more familiar with from preventing yourself from being bitten by insects have not been shown to affect Bluetongue virus transmission in the field. Similarly, pour-on insecticides do play a role in short-term prevention of biting or elimination of insects from a specific container, like a transport, but haven't been shown to affect Bluetongue virus transmission in the field. Stabling is where the good news starts, because we have actually got evidence that stables reduce contact between midges and animals that are in the stables, and you can generate vector-proof accommodation relatively cheaply, screening with mesh, putting brushes on doors and things like that to actually just stop insects getting into animals. Obviously, that is very much dependent on the specifics of the holdings you have, the level of containment of a barn or holding or shed, and how easy it is to actually make that vector proof, or reduce vectors coming into stables. But at least we have some anecdotal evidence of that actually working to reduce BTV transmission, and we know it reduces killer quallies coming into those buildings to bite the animals. So in brief summary, BTV is a virus that infects all ruminants that can cause disease in sheep and sometimes in cattle. It's spread by Culicornis midges, which means it's very seasonal and very dependent on temperature. BTV is a notifiable disease, still considered exotic in the UK. It's likely to overwinter in Europe, and it's likely to overwinter, arrive, or persist in the UK in 2025, 2026, into 2026. It's likely to impact ruminant welfare and trade in the UK. Reminder, there are vaccines for BTV licensed for use in the UK, but there are limited options for on-farm mitigation with the use of insecticides and stabling. And we can provide more information on that. So I think that's me. So I'll stop sharing.
That's great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you. And again, we've got some questions coming in, but we'll look at those after we've had a chat from Jim Hopkins, and I'd like to introduce Jim, who's the director of Yakidar Vets in Lampeter. He's also a vet himself for the Steffan and Priory Vets in West Wales. And Jim's many hats include he's chair of the IVC Evidentia Farm Animal Clinical Board and director of the Wales Veterinary Science Centre. So Jim's going to give us his experience as a vet in Bluetongue from a vet's perspective, especially with revaccination, and hopefully try and address some of the rumours and myths around vaccinating, particularly around fertility and reproductive issues, etc., and the importance of speaking to your vet about vaccination. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you for the invite today, and thank you for all the information that Natalie and Chris has shared. There's been a lot of information there. I'm not going to share any slides because I was going to put some up of the cases and that sort of thing, and I thought they'll be out of date as soon as I write the PowerPoint presentation. So I just thought I'd run through a few things and reiterate a few bits and points that Natalie and Chris have already made. So as we've seen from the maps that Natalie showed, the cases appear to be quite low, but the anecdotal sort of evidence that we've got from vets across the UK and farmers across the UK is there are many more cases, many more incidences of the disease that just aren't being reported to APHA. And when they are reported to APHA, there's a lack of interest in following up with testing sometimes. So I think the cases are probably likely to be higher than those reported, and it'll be interesting to see what the autumnal surveillance scheme does pick up and show us how far the disease has spread. There's certainly reports from the east of England mainly, I think, is where the clinical cases are, of the sort of dummy calves, empty cows at scanning, empty sheep at scanning as well as the sort of these sort of sick animals with the nasal discharges, the lameness, the crusting around the noses, where were they going? Nasal discharges, pyrexia, hypersalivation that we're seeing, but also bearing in mind that a lot of animals that are infected with Bluetongue are not showing disease either, and that's where these sampled animals are throwing up that are often appearing on the map. It's worth noting that those that are seen on the map are often post-movement tested, pre-movement tested, those sort of reasons for blood sampling. So really we're moving into a phase of disease acceptance. Chris has sort of alluded to that already. Bluetongue 3 is here. It isn't going to go anywhere, and we're going to have to accept that and work out ways of sort of limiting the impact on each of our herds and flocks. And I think the best sort of course that you can do with that is discussing with your own local vet that knows the situation on your own farm, your own business situation, and deciding whether you're going to vaccinate or ride out the storm, so to speak. But vaccination does remain the key protection that we have. It appears to be very effective. There doesn't seem to be of any cases in any vaccinated animals so far. But there are a number of myths out there around the vaccine which there's no evidence for. There don't seem to be any truth behind them at all. Particularly sort of worries that I've heard are the effect of fertility in males, and that the vaccine reduces fertility in males. There is no evidence of this whatsoever. But as Chris mentioned in his talk, there is a massive impact in fertility if those males get infected with Bluetongue 3. So it's certainly worth weighing up the pros and cons as to whether you're going to vaccinate or whether you're going to run the course of disease. Another one is fertility in the ewes, whether the vaccine has an effect on those. It's worth sort of thinking about when you do the vaccine, when you do administer the vaccine to animals. If you're vaccinating animals which are in their reproductive cycle, the ewes are with the rams, then you're much more likely to have an effect from the handling of those animals and the stress of the handling, and timing of the vaccination can be a big part of what you choose to do going forward. And then wanted to really highlight that Bluetongue 3 is still a reportable disease. It is still a notifiable disease. We still must report suspected cases that we have and allow APHA to deal with those in the way that they wish to deal with them. And also there is this sort of background noise from Bluetongue 8 and 12, and we don't want to miss those creeping across the UK as well. Worth sort of just bearing in mind that the vaccination only covers Bluetongue 3. So it's not, there's no protection against Bluetongue 8 at this time, and it's worth keeping an eye on those diseases as time goes forward. And I think that was all I was going to sort of say for now, until the panel discussion, which I'm sure there are plenty of questions.
That's great. Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. It's always great to get a hands-on vet's experience, and yeah, just highlighting that vaccination is the main tool in the bag at the moment. So thank you for that. If I could ask the other speakers to come back in and put your cameras on, please, that would be great for the question and answer session. I'd like to welcome in Gordon. Yep, Gordon's there. Who is this is Gordon Hickman, who's head of exotic disease policy at DEFRA, and Gordon's joining us for the Q&A session. And please do carry on popping your questions in the question box if you still have some. We've got quite a few to get through there, but we'll try and group them together if they're sort of similar questions. We've got a few come in already. So question that we have is, my flock were fully vaccinated in 2025, replacement lambs included. The second dose for adults was May, June for the lambs. When should they be vaccinated again? And do we vaccinate with one booster dose, or do we need to do another course of 2 vaccinations? So that could be one for Jim.
Yeah, that's fine. The licenses for these vaccines doesn't actually give the revaccination schedule yet, but the companies are advising that we're looking at a year to revaccinate and one single dose, but that may evolve over time, and it's worth just discussing what happens with your vet when you're getting the vaccine at the right time, and look out for any changes in information as we go forward.
Yeah, thank you. Is that likely to change depending on whether it's BTV3 or BTV8, depending on the serotype, etc.?
If it's BTV8, the vaccine isn't protecting for it anyway. The vaccines are only for Bluetongue 3. But yeah, the information that vaccine companies have so far is it's likely to be an annual rebooster with a single injection.
Just reading this one. So, do we know the exact number of animals for clinical cases, not premises numbers, that have been identified, and the mortality rate within those, UK only? So I don't know if Gordon might know that one, or Natalie. So this question's asking, do we know, for validation purposes, can we be told the exact number of clinical cases rather than number of effective premises, so number of animals, and the mortality rate within those?
So maybe I'll start. The real issue is, because we're only sampling a couple of animals on each of those premises, we don't know the full extent of that. So all you could, when we do report them in England, we do put the number of positive animals, but really the big numbers are where we've done surveillance. So we've sampled 14 animals on a farm, for example, or in a pre-movement test where, you know, there's been a batch of 30 or so sampled. So I'm sure it'll be a gross underestimate of the positive numbers. And the second thing is, because the investigation, if you like, in England is undertaken by the private vet, we don't have a lot of that data within government in terms of mortality levels. So, you know, we get the sample, we report it as positive, so we don't have that sort of follow-up number in terms of one of those, how many of those animals died, or the morbidity rate within that. We did do a little bit of a survey last year by phoning up people afterwards, but it's only sometime afterwards, when you've had, you know, perhaps the opportunity for a couple of cycles within that herd or flock, when you actually get that sort of true level of morbidity. It is true, however, that the reported clinical signs are much lower than we saw in continental Europe, particularly in the Netherlands, and we don't really understand that going forward. So I don't have those numbers. I could probably ask our NEAG colleagues to dig out the positive animal numbers, but we do report them all on gov.uk. It's just that they drop off the bottom after after about 5 events. I'll have a look to see if I've got the data to hand, but if not, we'll perhaps get it back to you, Lynn, or back to the Secretariat.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I don't know if Natalie was able to add anything to that, or no. Okay, thanks, Natalie. Actually, this one's for you as well, Gordon. Are there any plans for Bluetongue winter surveillance? Natalie alluded to this in her talk as well, but this year, and if so, can you talk us through what this might entail, the areas covered, and to what extent? So talking about the winter surveillance. Okay,
so yes, we're definitely doing it, and we've actually started. So between now and Christmas, we'll be doing surveillance in England across the south coast. So it'll be from Cornwall to Kent, and we'll be sampling 14 animals in each farm, and between 12 and 20 animals per county, depending on the size of those counties. We're finding a lot already. So I think in Cornwall, I think we took 14 sets of samples, and 12 of those were positive. All 12 farms, at least one animal was positive. So Cornwall's definitely very, very badly hit, and we're now just sort of moving the way across. So we've already found cases in Hampshire, East Sussex, West Sussex, Somerset, and I think one in Devon. So we've already found 21 positive farms. So it's a very high hit rate from that winter surveillance, and those are picked at random. These are cattle that have been outside, and I suppose are relatively close to the coast. So we're doing it as part of TB testing, so it's not a separate visit. Colleagues from the Veterinary Delivery Partnership, when they've got a scheduled TB test with a farm that meets the eligibility criteria, the farmer gets informed that they've been the lucky one to be picked, and then it's taken at the same time as the sampling. We're also asking the farmer if they'll also allow us to submit those samples for AHDB testing, just to add to our surveillance for that. The AHDB testing is voluntary, the Bluetongue testing is not.
Thank you, Gordon. Question for everybody, really. Is Bluetongue likely to be a problem next year, and in particular in relation to, or we'll be looking at a similar picture for BTB3 next year? People are thinking about planning, vaccinating early spring. Who wants to?
I can hop on in for Wales. Not a similar picture, probably a more extensive picture for Wales next year. We obviously don't know the impacts on fertility, and we won't know those until the spring comes and we see that all play out, and we'd ask you to be vigilant and keep that informed. But given that we slowed the spread into Wales this year, and next year we won't be, we do expect it to be wider.
Would you say similar story, perhaps Jim or Gordon or Chris even for England as well?
Yeah, it's really difficult to know, isn't it, as to what we're sort of in the hands of the midges as to where it's going to go, where they're moving around, where animal movements as well. We sort of talk about the midges moving around the country, but if you've got animals moving from the east coast of England across to the west coast of Wales, they're probably more likely to move it across the country than any midges are. So it's sort of, I think farmers need to bear in mind where they're buying and moving stock to. And particularly sort of if you're moving sheep around for winter grazing and things, is there a risk of them bringing it back to the rest of your farm and things? And that's where vaccination comes in as a big protection for the rest of your flock or herd.
I think in England we're expecting a similar picture, but it may be different. So in areas where it hasn't obviously been, high sets of prevalence, it's more likely that it'll be in those sort of areas. What worries me is that, and Jim mentioned it, so we saw this spring the effects of the previous year's infection in cattle, and that's when we were getting those fertility issues and dummy calves, etc. My worry is we'll have that, next spring from now, if you like, and when they were being served. So I think there will be impacts next year. It's just where the clinical disease will pop up, because we don't know how much undisclosed disease there are, but it could still well manifest itself in fertility issues, which is obviously clinical as well, but not in terms of the crusty noses, etc., and the lameness that Jim was referring to.
Yeah, thank you. How long will a vaccinated sheep have protection from BTB3? Who wants to? Jim, you have a go at that one?
12 months.
Yeah, I thought you might say that.
Months, and we can't really guarantee any longer than that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And let's have a look at the questions. Yeah, how long does a midge live, Chris?
Too long.
$1 million question. Long enough, unfortunately.
Long enough.
So this again is dependent on temperature. So if it's really hot, these insects die quite quickly, but it's still sufficient to transmit the virus. What we're working on at the moment is how long these insects can live for under cold conditions, because basically they, as long as it's not too cold, so as long as it's not forming ice in the insect themselves, they can actually enter a sort of state of torpor, of not being active, and just hold out. So that's kind of one of the research questions we have at the moment. But yeah, whether they can survive long enough over the winter to be infected in, let's say, October, and still be still be surviving until spring, it's quite a long stretch. And so one of our big questions is how on earth does this virus persist? And it has done both in the continent and in the UK over the winter, despite the fact there's not lots of midges flying around. So yeah, we don't really know, but long enough, unfortunately.
Yeah, so unless we get a really, I'm thinking sort of, way down south, but unless we get a really cold winter, there is a possibility for them to survive in nice warm cattle sheds, for example, over the winter period.
Exactly that, yeah. So, and don't think last year we had a frost until halfway through January. So that period of time is reducing in recent years. So yeah, they don't have to be asleep for as long these days.
Yeah, thank you. Are symptoms of Bluetongue virus in pregnant ewes similar to that of Schmallenberg? Jim's nodding. They are quite similar.
Yeah, they are quite similar. You probably get more deformities with Schmallenberg than with Bluetongue, but you certainly get the abortions, and any sort of abortions you get within sheep, it is worth investigating, because if you investigate, you know what it is, and you can hopefully do something about it. If we don't investigate, we're just guessing, and that's not particularly helpful for your flock going forward.
Okay, thank you. We've got another one on vaccination. We have Bluetongue 8 in the area. Will this vaccine become available too in terms of severity? How does it compare to BTV 3? Ooh, okay, probably, possibly Natalie or Jim. You got any answers for that one?
I mean, sorry. Well, Gordon will kick in to start, and then
yeah, go on,
Jim
Gordon.
and Natalie can have a go. So we do have approved vaccines for Bluetongue 8. It's just because nobody's bought any. Obviously, it's not viable for the pharmaceutical companies to put it on the market. So to a certain extent, I think it's down to this audience as to what the demand is, but they can be imported under a special import certificate, where there is that demand. So again, my advice would be to talk to your private vet about, whether it's worth it for your farm, for that farm. There is no current multivalent vaccine that covers both Bluetongue 3 and Bluetongue 8, so they would be two separate ones. We heard, didn't we, from Rui the other day, in terms of what they've done on, is it Guernsey, where they've actually done both Bluetongue 8 and Bluetongue 3 because of the threat, and that's two separate vaccinations. So they're out there, and just talk to your private vet, I would say.
And just to supplement, we do have the licenses available on our website for the Bluetongue 8 vaccines. So if people do want it, they can get hold of it.
Jim, you want to add to that?
Just say time will tell, and I agree with the other two. I think Gordon put it very well.
Sorry, just to pick up on a point about kind of whether BTV8 is as bad clinically. From the studies we've done, I would say they're fairly similar. The Dutch would definitely say that BTV3 is worse, but we haven't seen that level of clinical disease in the UK yet, and hopefully we won't. But in terms of the clinical signs we expect to see, they should be pretty similar. So it's not like BTV8 is that different from a field point of view.
Okay, thanks, Chris. And we did have another question about multivalent vaccine for BTV8 and 12, but the answer will be the same, I guess, Gordon, that we don't have the multivalent vaccines available.
There isn't one at all for Bluetongue 12.
Yeah. Okay. No vaccine at all. No.
No. Just while I've got the floor, I have dug out those numbers in terms of animals. So Nat said, as you say, there were 178 premises. We've had 348 animals that are positive, 49 sheep, 296 cattle, and 3 deer. Those are, but please don't think that's the totality of it, because we only sample 3 per farm, or up to 14 on those surveillance things. So there could well be many more.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Gordon. Sorry, I'm conscious that we're nearing the end of the session, but one question is: would testing of abortions be paid for by DEFRA? Gordon, that's another one for you, I think.
So where there is a clinical report case, phone it in as a clinical report case, and if you haven't had Bluetongue before, that should be eligible for a free test for Bluetongue.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to whiz through a few before we leave. Yeah, we will share the link for the impact survey. And should you be doing AI during the vaccination period? Jim?
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Do AI?
Sorry, should you be doing AI during the vaccination period?
Ideally, you'd be doing your vaccination prior to doing any fertility sort of interventions and things, because any stress handling of the animals could affect their holding and conceiving.
very quick one for you, Natalie. Will Wales close the border again for unvaccinated animals from England in 2026?
Well, being pedantic, we technically didn't close the border. We just controlled movements. But no, what we have done now is plan to be the enduring regime into 2026. Now, there might be some more tweaks. But as I said in my slide, once in, we can't get it out. So there wouldn't be too much point in doing the same thing.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I think we need to, it's 6 o'clock, so I'm conscious that we run out of time, but just like to say a very big thank you to our speakers for your insights and knowledge this evening. Thank you for sharing that with us. Just a reminder, if I could, Kyle could get the links for the final slides on the up on the screen again for us, please. Thank you, Kyle. So yeah, there's just some additional organisations there for additional support. If you feel like you need to get that extra support, then there are some very helpful organisations there. And we, as I said at the beginning, this recording will be available after the webinar has ended. I'll make that available to you. So if you just Google, go on the AHDB website and go in all the ruminant health and welfare websites, you'll find the links to the webinars on there, as well as all that wonderful, useful information that we've got that I've shared at the beginning with the movement checker, etc., and looking at vaccination and all the supporting information we've got around that for you is on those websites too. So thanks again to our speakers. Thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening. Thank you to the audience. Thank you for your questions. And all the other organisations on the screen who continue to help us with this, finding our way through this virus and trying to bring the information to you as best we can as this ever-changing situation with the Bluetongue virus. So we will keep you updated and keep you posted on additional information as well. And again, please complete the feedback survey, but also please complete the impact survey, because it's really important for us to get your feedback on the virus and how it's affecting you on farm as well. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you to the speakers, and thank you to everyone for supporting the webinar. And I wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.